You are listening to episode 2 of the Mom on Purpose podcast. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode with me about my life and perspective as a mom on purpose. Welcome to Mom on Purpose podcast. If this is your first time listening, thanks for coming. The Mom on Purpose podcast is produced every week. Come back often and please subscribe in iTunes. All links and materials referenced are in the show notes, which you'll find at momonpurpose.com. Every Mom on Purpose episode starts out with a quick mom verse designed for your encouragement. Today is James 5, 7, and 8. It says, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it, until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient." What encourages me about this verse is that we are to be patient as mothers. Many things will prompt you as a mom to focus on the here and now and the immediate results. And sometimes we need to do that. Sometimes we need to look at our child's attitude in the moment and deal with it right here so that in the short term we're dealing with things. But what I want to encourage you to do is also to take the long-term perspective, to consider how are the choices that I'm making as a mom today going to impact our lives and my child's lives for the rest of time? How can I encourage my heart to have a patient perspective, to wait for the early and the late rains, and to trust that God is the Lord over the harvest, that He will bring about a harvest in my children's lives? Because God is faithful, and He has ordained early rains in their lives and late rains in their lives, and so I can take a patient perspective. All right, Mom on Purpose listeners, now we're going to re-enter part 2 of an interview that my friend Tracy did with me, where we're starting out talking about Titus 2 mentors in our lives. The last year or so, year and a half of high school, we started going to a different church, and it was the one I mentioned earlier with some larger homeschooling families. And there were 2 ladies that both they let me babysit for them, but I also sometimes would just get to go and hang out with them while they were just, during the day with their kids and stuff. And I feel like they were really the first sort of Titus 2 mentors that I had, because I had never really seen mothers parenting little children and in daily life. And so I feel like that was the first set of that I had. And then, honestly, this is the thing that kind of about blogging that I feel like can get lost. It can seem, or I've wondered sometimes if it can come across like I think I know all this stuff and I just have nothing but my own thoughts to pass to everybody. But the truth is that virtually everything I share, I would say virtually none of it is stuff that I made up or that originates with me. It's either stuff that's directly drawn from the Word, and then I'm just applying principles derived from the Word, or but more often it's stuff that I've picked up from other women. And so over the years, since those early 2, I would say that whenever I've seen in my life that I'm lacking something, I try to find somebody who's strong or good in that area, and I ask as many questions as I can ask of them. So if Doug and I would meet a couple that had a really strong marriage, we would we would invite ourselves over for dinner, invite them over for dinner, and just ask as many questions as we could about how they keep their marriage strong. And when we saw people who were still flirtatious or still clearly in love, we'd try to really observe and take notes of what they're doing. And when we've seen parents who have really obedient, just pleasant children, we ask a lot. We asked a lot of questions about that. How are you doing that? What are you doing? So I've tried to look at people who are 10, 20, 30, 40 years further down the road that I kind of think I want to be on. And then And then I just ask questions of those ladies who, and nobody fits all of it. Like there might be women who are great at hospitality, but really have a miserable marriage, or have a great marriage, but their kids are kind of But but just learning what you can from the women who are around you. That's kind of what Titus 2 has looked like in my life.
Yeah. And so when you were overseas, was that more challenging because it was harder to find people, or how did you do that even in those years?
Well, we did have, in every place that we lived, we found house church situations. So sometimes there were, there's a pretty rich expat community, or expatriate for those who don't live overseas, wherever you go overseas. So sometimes it was people who worked at consulates. Sometimes it was business people. Sometimes it was people in the missions community. But anybody that I saw, I mean, there were single women that taught me so much about dependence on the Lord and trust and having a servant heart, taught me recipes. I mean, just really great things. In fact, this one single lady, she had grown up as the oldest of 7. And so she always cooked in these huge amounts. So she was a great person to get recipes from, because she's like, I never learned how to pare down my recipes for one person. So I just make big batches and then freeze the rest.
Oh, that's so funny. My husband has always cooked in enormous batches. I mean, we were first married. He bought me a 5-gallon bucket for flour. And I remember I was literally angry at him, telling him there was no way I would ever cook that much, ever. I've never used those amount of flour. And now we're to the stage where I'm like, I think I need another 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah, really.
Because we go through so much. It's funny. I told him that I think he's finally caught up to his cooking, because he'll make a meal and the kids will eat everything that's out there. And I'm like, I think now we know why you make lots of food.
You were just getting ready
to have lots of kids. That's awesome. So it's looked like a lot of seeking out and really just trying to find out. Do you find that people who are really great at certain things don't always know why? Like that, I've got one friend who has amazing kids, and I'm like, well, what do you do? And you have to get really specific, because a lot of times she'll just say, I don't know. We don't do anything too specific. And I think, you're just fooling me,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's where I think it's really helpful to spend. That's why I'm like really thankful that a lot of those were in the context of house church, because I do think the primary way that we pick up things like that is just through time. And it's something that our like social media, text for an answer real quick society is missing out on. Like when I would go, let's say, to the same lady's house every Sunday for 4 or 5 hours, and we'd have church, we'd have worship time, we'd have prayer for each other. In the middle of that, we might have a snack time. And then at the end of it, we might have lunch. And maybe my kids are taking naps there. I mean, like that's time together. And so there's time to see, oh, okay, I see that she's just mixed up the batter and she made the stuff and then she washed the bowl right away. That's how she keeps a clean kitchen, is she didn't just set it beside the sink the way that I do. Like she took it and she rinsed it while it was quick and the dough was still soft and it was really easy to clean. And that's how she keeps a clean kitchen. So I feel like we learn those things through time and observation. And that's something that our quick fast food, social media society is really weak in. And it is something that every other century would have had, is just a lot of time together.
That's so true. And isn't it funny, those things, like I've always felt like I've had 2 left feet when it comes to homemaking in a lot of ways, just because of those kind of things, the washing the bowl right away. It's like, oh my goodness, it's such a simple thing. And almost to the point where nobody's going to tell you, when they say, hey, clean the kitchen, they're not going to say that. You don't even think that you're doing it. But like you said, watching, you see, oh, that's not something I would do.
Yeah. And it's the same way, like, when you observe a really wise mom and you see, once she started correcting him, she lowered her voice. She didn't raise it, or she pulled him to the side and got eye to eye with him, or whatever it is. Like, you start to observe these things. But otherwise, it's really easy to think, well, she's just really talented at keeping her kitchen clean, or she's just got a knack for dealing with toddlers and I don't. But the truth is that most things are very learnable, and it's just a matter of having good people to learn from.
So you're kind of almost always in seeking mode then. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I'm always kind of taking notes, watching people. And I even watch strangers. Like, if I'm just sitting around at an airport waiting for somebody, I'm watching people. Like, I always just, I think I'm in constant learning mode.
So what, and in all this, what made you want to start a podcast? You know, you've had this really, this blog that's been very consistent, and many of us have really loved. So what is it that made you want to start a podcast?
Well, I think one of the things I kind of mentioned a minute ago, but I wanted to make it clear that I'm not just trying to be self-promoting. Like, I'm trying to help share ideas that are helpful to me. And I really wanted to highlight other women. But, and on my old blog, I used to do that, but I feel like I switched to jessconnell.com because I had written a novel. And so I thought I might be doing more writing under my name. So I just thought, well, I'll just buy the website and have it all on my site. But I feel like it lends itself a little less to guest posts because it's under my private name. And so, so instead of that, I've been looking for ways to, you know, feature other women and the wisdom and basically this process that I'm talking about how I do pepper people with questions and try to learn what I can from women who are doing a particular thing well. And so for me, that's really the thing that I realized about podcasting, is that it would give me the opportunity to feature these other women, some women that maybe other people have come across, but then maybe some women who are just women that I know in my personal life that have a real strength in a particular area, and give them the opportunity to essentially serve up their wisdom in the same way that I'm talking about, where it's basically just preserving it for anybody who wants to come across it and check it out and learn.
That's awesome. Well, and you know, when you posted about starting that podcast, it was so cool for me to see how many people responded. And like, we're all looking forward to it. I think it'll be very fun. So in that feedback, what are the things that people have wanted to hear from? I mean, have they given you ideas of what they're looking forward to hearing about? Yeah,
I've gotten some. I think people really want to hear about large family issues. I think women want to talk through real life challenges like postpartum season and that kind of thing. And I like what you mentioned at the beginning, even like keeping up our motivation as a mom and not losing heart, kind of being inspired back toward our purpose as moms and not losing sight of that. And then a number of women actually said they were interested in just learning from the everyday women that I know, like not necessarily the famous book writers or, you know, pastors' wives or things like that. But a lot of people just mentioned, hey, if there are women you know that have a particular strength, share it with us. So that's kind of bits and pieces of the sorts of topics and interviews we'll have here on Mom on Purpose.
That's awesome. Well, I was going to say, those match up pretty well then with the topics that you have thought of maybe covering, or are there specific ones that maybe nobody has mentioned that you're thinking of doing?
Yeah. I mean, I would say a lot of it is just going to be an extension of the sorts of topics that we talk about at Jess Connell. It's going to be anything related to motherhood, but it'll be both like big picture philosophy stuff, surviving and thriving through postpartum life and facing the challenges of having a large family or being a mom of all littles. What does that look like? As well
Crazy.
as practical stuff too, like how to get organized or how to find time to pray for your family when you're a mom, or how to keep on the same page of parenting. So all that kind of stuff, we're going to be dealing with big picture issues and nitty-gritty details too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me over the season of parenting how, like you just mentioned, the staying on the same page as parents is so important, and it's so hard in those first formative years. And then you kind of hit like we know how to do discipline. We have the same ideas now because we've worked that out. And I think it's so cool that probably even though you and Doug are down that road, that you remember that that's a really challenging season.
Yeah.
It is. It's a really hard, and it's not that you don't run into new things that you're like, well, how do we handle teenagers and all that stuff?
Oh yeah.
but that there are the initial, when you just have one little baby, and I remember we came up with a rule of no talking when there's a baby crying, because it always it makes everybody's nerves on edge, and we would always get in these fights over really silly stuff.
Interesting.
And it was because we were all, but that's something, it's been a rule in our marriage, since baby number 1, month number 2. And we don't even think about it now, but it's just a habit now that we'll just stop talking if there's a baby crying.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, but it's just one of those, I think it's great that you're able to go back and think through a lot of that stuff. I think it'll be helpful.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I do think that's one of the things that I found, and it's one of the reasons why I blog and do want a podcast, is when I started asking women questions like we just talked about, I found that particularly in marriage, particularly in issues of parenting, that once people were about 8 to 10 years beyond a phase, it was all, and they weren't still practicing it. It was almost like they couldn't remember anymore the details. It's like your brain loses what you're not actively using. Yeah. And so when I would go to ask a woman, well, did you ever make the baby wait to nurse, or did you just nurse them right away? They're like, well, I don't know. Sometimes it seems like and it was just these vague answers. And so that's part of why I write stuff down, is because I realize that by the time my daughter or my daughters-in-law are coming along, I may not actually remember how I handled a tantrum, or I may not actually remember how I put together a chore chart. But if I've written those things down, or if I've recorded them somewhere, I can at least say, I think I did an article about that. I have no idea, but I think I wrote it down back then. And at least there's something for them to go on, rather than what I had a lot was just a lot of vague answers, and I kind of had to piece together those things from bits and pieces from books, and trying to sort out, like, what's the fruit of that? Do I see kids who are raised like that? And is that good? Is it bad? Is it, I feel like so much of my early mothering was doing that, piecing together bits from books, and then trying to match that up with women that I knew, and sorting out who did what and what advice is right,
Right. Amen to that. I know when we were first married and looking through the same thing and looking through books and stuff, I know my husband would always say, I'd say, I've been reading this great book. And he'd say, okay, well, tell me about the author's family, because I really don't want to hear what the advice is until I know what the fruit is. I'm like, oh, man, but it sounds really good. He's like, I don't care unless I know what the fruit looks like.
Yeah.
So I think that makes a whole lot of sense. So in a lot of ways, you are becoming one of these Titus 2 women as we get a little bit older and more kids and all that stuff. You in a lot of ways, for many of us, are one of these Titus 2 women. So what advice would you give, or what would you share with the younger you if you could go back?
With the younger me, I think what I would say is, don't put anyone on a pedestal, because the temptation is to get what is wise and biblical advice and see somebody who's strong in an area, and then raise, or for me at least, raise that person up to this place of like, you know, a lack of error or something, as if they can't fail in other areas, or as if, like, for example, they may have done very wise things with their toddler, but maybe their advice for teenagers isn't as good. Or maybe it's great advice that was the right thing, and their child is still a sinner and goes astray. And so it doesn't make the advice completely worthless. So not putting people on a pedestal to the point where when they disappoint you, you'll lose all hope or you know, confidence in that person. Don't look for perfect examples of being a wife and mother and homemaker and perfect marriage and perfect family devotions, and everything has to be in order. Like, just look for good and learn from it, and don't be disillusioned by flesh and blood, because nobody's going to do it all well. And I feel like this is still a lesson I have to learn. Like, I still, in people I look up to, or also in people that I'm befriending or things like this, like, why do we do it? We have these expectations of people, and yet they're just normal people, and they have imperfection, and they have struggle, and sometimes their kids are sassy, and sometimes their kitchen's a mess, and like, and not letting those things then erode. Because if you put somebody up on a pedestal and then you find their humanity, well, then you know, it all falls apart. But if you try to keep in mind the whole time that, okay, this is a human, like, she's going to have weaknesses, then you can kind of learn what you can, and maybe not lose heart.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's part of the beauty, don't you, of relationship, that you're going to have strengths where they may need to shore up, and they're going to have strengths where we need to shore up. And it's kind of this beautiful symbiotic relationship that can happen when you are able to give grace and receive grace.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I didn't have that modeled. Like, I didn't see, you know, we kind of went to church on Sunday. Well, actually we went Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. Right. but that was kind of it. Like, one of our church friends lived up the road, but I mean, they had boys. So, you know, I kind of saw them every now and then, but then like my real life was like with all my peers, my same age peers every day at school. And so I didn't see, and I didn't experience kind of one anothering within the church. And it's still something that I kind of shy away from. Like, I can feel in my heart that while I want people to tell me the truth, and I want people to refine me, my heart still fears it. You know what I mean? Like, it's still a terrifying thing to be exposed and feel vulnerable. And I'm learning to welcome it. I'm learning to lean into that. But it is not something that comes naturally, and I never saw it done. You know, growing up, and I didn't see, and that's not even just in my family. I mean, I didn't see it in my family. I didn't see it in my church. I didn't see it in Christians at large until, you know, until a good ways into my adult years. Maybe to the most personal degree. I mean, I've just seen it more since moving here to Washington. I feel like the relationships that we've developed here, people are really honest with each other, and I really value it. I'm thankful for people who are willing to be honest with me.
Oh man, it is scary, isn't it though? I think it's almost, you know, when you think about different cultures. I remember in Southeast Asia and stuff, they have this save face culture where you're not able, you know, if you want to say something to somebody, it's better if you say it to their brother, and they will quietly send it along, you know? Yes. And we think, oh well, that's totally different from our culture. And yet, you know, I think we are all a little bit queasy when it comes to the vulnerable part of our lives, and to be corrected, or to be, I totally get that.
That's a good observation. I do feel like I was shocked by some of the bluntness that I found in China and in Turkey that we would never say here. Like people would say like, you're fat or whatever.
Oh my goodness.
and it's like, they're just speaking the truth. Like you are fatter and bigger, but we would never ever say that. So they are even honest, I think, in some ways that we're not.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think that it is interesting when you get a little bit of cultural context in different things that, you almost have to live somewhere for a while not to get offended in certain ways. And I wonder even if, Washington, so I remember when we moved to Iowa, everybody, oh, you talk so fast. And, and we didn't feel like we talked fast or even that Iowans talk slow, but there was a difference in even that kind of communication. And we had a college professor that was living in New York and had lived in New York and then moved to Washington. And I took a course from him, and he mentioned how you could never just speak the truth to a Washingtonian. You had to say it nicely. You couldn't just do the normal.
Oh, interesting.
But I do think that there are pockets of churches and things like that we can get to where you could be more honest, and you can really do so much growing in those contexts when you're willing to do it. Don't you think?
I do. And I feel like learning to be honest and evaluate who we really are. And then, like you said, I mean, even the way that writing forces you to be honest, just honesty in general. I think about Romans 12:3 all the time, and it says, make a sober estimate of your faith. And really, I think it applies to not just our faith, but every area of my life. Like make a sober estimate of your marriage, make a sober estimate of your parenting and what it's producing, make a sober estimate of the words that you're speaking and the vocal tones that you're using and what that's producing in the lives of your children. And just making a sober estimate of your life is such a valuable thing. It's really the goal of Mom on Purpose is to get people thinking about, what is my purpose? Am I operating in a purposeful way? Am I just reacting to life, or am I actually coming at it with goals and with ideas in mind, so that I don't get to the end of my life and live with all this regret that I could have maybe with some forethought shored up and changed that end result.
Absolutely. And it's so good to have those reminders to pull us back to that in the daily grind when we're cooking dinner or those kind of things that will help us later on not to have those regrets. Because it's in the daily that the life is lived. I think Ann Voskamp says many things about that, of just it's spent in minutes, but oh, well, that's very good. I have so appreciated being able to interview you and talk with you.
This has been so fun.
It has been so much fun. And I just, like I said, I've so enjoyed being able to read everything you've said over the years. And I thank you for all the time that you've invested for women like me and keeping that conversation open. I think that's one of the beautiful things about the internet, about podcasting now, and blogs and everything, that it has really created a community for those of us who don't necessarily have a community right nearby.
Absolutely. I do think that's one of the things that I wanted to mention too, is that I definitely don't see this as a replacement for Titus 2. I do think that the best way that we learn those Titus 2 things is up close. And like we've talked about throughout this, like seeing somebody's whole life in view and realizing that, oh, she always has shoes piled up by the door. She's not perfect. Or wow, she really snapped at the 5-year-old. Wow, okay, she's not perfect. All those things that help you put it in the context of flesh and blood. And I feel like that's that's the potential downfall of online. But that said, I have also found great value from the Sally Clarksons and Mary Cassians and Carolyn Mahaney's, all the people who have been willing to put themselves out there. And that's the spirit in which we're offering this podcast. So I appreciate you helping me kick it off. Awesome. This has been a fun conversation, and I'm looking forward to the future conversations and my future opportunity to interview you. So,
oh, well, that'd be fun too. I always appreciate talking with you, Jess.
That concludes the interview of me, and you can find show notes and hot topics at momonpurpose.com. You can also check out my blog at jessconnell.com. That's Connell. Come back next time for episode 3. We'll be talking with Mandy Eman from lifeyourway.net. We're going to be talking about getting through seasons of stress as a mom. Thanks for listening to the Mom on Purpose podcast. For more information and all links and show notes, go to momonpurpose.com. You can make a huge difference in how many women find and benefit from this podcast. Please like Mom on Purpose on iTunes and take 2 minutes to leave a review. I'll meet you again next time to equip you to be a mom on purpose.